I never fully understood social media. To me, it was just screens full of people showing snippets of their lives as if the whole world needed to know what they were eating or where they were. But for Valeria, my 15-year-old daughter, it was something more. It was her passion, her job, her way of connecting with the world. She was always bright and full of ideas, and when she started gaining followers, I felt proud. "Dad, this is just the beginning," she would tell me with that smile that lit up even the darkest corner of the house. But everything changed. At first, they were harmless messages: "You're beautiful, I love your content," things like that. Valeria would read them aloud, laughing, and I could only feel them, trying to understand why she cared so much about the opinions of strangers. Then the messages became more intense. "You're mine, no one will understand you like I do, you should be more careful with what you post." She tried to downplay it, but I could see her smile fade a little every time she opened her phone. One night I heard her crying in her room. When I walked in, I found her sitting on the bed, hugging her legs with her phone tossed to the side. "Dad, I don't know what to do," she said, her voice shaking. She showed me the messages. They were threats, grotesquely edited photos of her, even addresses of places she frequented. "They know where I live," she whispered. I felt a chill run down my spine. We reported to the police, but they couldn't do much. "Block them or ignore them," they said, as if that were enough. Valeria deleted her account, changed her number, even stopped going out for a while, but the messages continued. Coming in, it was as if someone was watching from nearby, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The day she disappeared, everything seemed normal. She had gone to record a video in a nearby park, something simple without giving many details. "Don't worry, Dad, I'll be fine," she told me before leaving, and that was the last time I saw her. Hours later, I received a notification on my phone. It was a post from her, but it wasn't like the others. The photo was dark, almost unrecognizable, and the message read, "No one will find me. Time." I tried to call her, but her phone was off. I ran to the park, asked the neighbors, called her friends, but no one knew anything. Valeria had shown up. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The police found no clues, and I felt increasingly powerless. Social media, which had once been her world, was now just a constant reminder of her absence. Her followers posted theories. Some said she had faked her disappearance to gain fame, others that she had escaped from something, but I knew the truth: something bad had happened to her, something very bad. And then the rumor started. In a distant neighborhood, people talked about a woman who appeared at night, moaning and crying. At first, I didn't think anything of it. What did that have to do with my daughter? But one night I dreamed of her. She was standing in front of me wearing that white dress she loved so much, looking at me with those sad eyes I missed so much. "Dad," she whispered, "find me?" The rumors came increasingly and mysteriously. It was something I didn't want to believe at first. A neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, an abandoned alley, a spectral figure that appeared at night. People said it was a young woman dressed in white, moaning and seeking comfort. Some people claimed to have seen her from afar. Others said they only heard her voice, and it was a moan that washed away the blood. At first, I dismissed it as nonsense. What could a ghost have to do with my daughter? But something inside me wouldn't leave me alone. Perhaps it was the despair I was feeling, perhaps the hope of finding something. Anything that would get me to Valeria. So one night, armed with a flashlight and a photo of her, I headed to that place and learned about it from some friends. In small talk, they claimed that one of their sons had seen this ghost, and it reminded him of my daughter. Furthermore, the area was somewhat close to the park where she was last seen. The place was just as gloomy as they had described. Empty streets, broken streetlights, and a silence that seemed to absorb any sound. The alley in question was at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by. Among the piles of trash and overgrown weeds, I stood for a moment, feeling the weight of fear in my chest. I didn't know what I was doing there, if I truly believed in ghosts, but then I heard it. A low, almost imperceptible moan, as if someone were crying in the distance. My heart raced, and I wondered if it was Valeria. I called out, but only received the echo of my own voice. I moved forward carefully, shining the flashlight into every corner. The trash crunched beneath my feet, and the air smelled rotten. Suddenly, a shadow passed in front of me. So fast that I almost lost sight of her. "Valeria!" I shouted, running to where the movement had gone, but there was no one there, only a cold wind that made my skin crawl. I stopped, panting, thinking I was losing my mind. I was imagining things, or perhaps it was the exhaustion of months of fruitless searching. That's when I saw her at the end of the alley. Under the dim moonlight, she was there, my Valeria, or at least something that resembled her. She was wearing that torn and dirty white dress. Her hair fell in disarray over her face, But what struck me most were her eyes. Those eyes I loved so much were now empty, filled with infinite sadness. Valeria whispered, reaching out a hand toward her. That apparition did nothing, but I was sure it was her. Her countenance and appearance were the same, and she just stared at me with that expression that broke my heart. Then she pointed to a pile of trash beside her. I wanted to approach her and ask her what that meant, but before I could take a step, she disappeared as if she had never been there. I froze, my heart still frozen. Beating so hard I felt it would burst, I returned to the alley the next day, this time with tools. I didn't tell anyone where I was going because I knew they would think I was crazy, but I didn't care. There was a chance, however slim, of finding my daughter. I would take it. I began digging through the pile of trash Valeria had pointed out. The smell was unbearable, and each shovelful cost me a superhuman effort, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. And then I found it, a torn and stained piece of fabric, but unmistakable. It was the dress Valeria had been wearing the last time. My hands trembled as I continued finishing until I finally found something that made me recoil. I let out a sharp scream, and it was a pale, cold arm. It was sticking out of the trash. I fell to my knees crying, screaming her name. I didn't want to believe it, and I couldn't accept it. Part of me had resigned myself to the fact that I had lost Valeria some time ago, but finding her like this, in this way, was impossible. My daughter was there, my Valeria, the only thing I had left. She was buried under a pile of rubbish as if she were worthless. I called the police, and when they arrived, they confirmed what I already knew. She'd been there all that time, waiting for someone to find her. While the officers did their work, I stood there staring at the spot where the ghost had appeared. After burying my daughter's remains, I thought I'd find some peace, but that wasn't the case. The nights grew longer and colder. And although Valeria no longer appeared in the alley, her presence seemed to have moved. My mind dreamed of her pale face, her eyes filled with sadness. Dad, those dreams told me don't stop. I didn't understand what else I could do. The police had closed the case, saying they didn't have enough evidence to continue investigating, but I couldn't settle. Something told me there was a piece missing, something Valeria wanted me to find. That's when I decided to check her computer. I'd never done that before because I respected her privacy, even after her death, but now I had no choice. I turned on the computer hoping that some password would stop me, but it didn't. Valeria had left everything open as if she knew I'd need to get in one day. When the investigation began, the police found her phone, but everything was deleted, and they never asked me to access her computer. I didn't know why, but I found a lot of things. Among those files, I found something that made my blood run cold. A hidden folder full of screenshots and deleted messages. Using data recovery software, I managed to restore some of them. They were conversations with a man, someone who at first seemed kind and even charming, made promises to Valeria, telling her he would help her grow online, that no one understood her like he did. We can do great things together, but little by little the tone changed. The messages became darker, more possessive. If you don't come, you'll regret it, one read. No one will believe you if you speak up, said another, and then I found the screenshot that changed everything. A picture of the map and the location of the park and a photo with the man with his back turned. He was wearing a cap and a dark jacket. Valeria had written, I met with him. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I need answers. I immediately wondered if this was the man who had been accusing her, if he was the same man who had led her to her death, but there were no names or clear photos, only vague clues. However, one of the screenshots showed a partial phone number visible. It was minimal, but at least it was something. I called that number again and again, but no one answered until one night someone answered. He didn't say anything, just breathed. On the other end of the line, "Who are you?" I asked, trying to remain calm. The only response was a whisper, "Come to the abandoned warehouse on Juarez Street, come alone." I didn't think twice. I grabbed my gun I had stashed away and headed there. The warehouse was an old building with broken windows and walls covered in graffiti. When I walked in, I felt a chill. That's when I saw him. It was him, the man in the cap, the one in the photos. He was sitting in a corner with his head in his hands. He looked gaunt, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. When he saw me, his eyes opened wide, filled with fear. "Is it you?" I asked, holding the gun in my pocket. I was ready to finish that son of a bitch. "You killed my daughter?" I asked. The man shook his head, but his voice trembled. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to scare her, to make her understand that she couldn't ignore me." But she resisted, and then everything spiraled out of control. I felt a rage I'd never experienced before. I wanted to make him pay for what he'd done to Valeria. But before I could move, he started speaking again, this time in an extremely desperate tone. "She won't leave me alone," he said. "Every night she's there watching me. I can't sleep, I can't eat. She says things to me, tells me I'm going to regret it. Please make her stop. His words left me frozen. He was telling me that Valeria's spirit had been tormenting him, and for a moment I didn't know what to believe, but then something strange also happened. The warehouse lights flickered and a gust of cold wind swept through the place. The man screamed, covering his head as if he were being attacked by something invisible. Leave me alone, leave me alone. He was crying and saying he was sorry. At that moment, I knew Valeria was there, guiding me once again. I called the police, and when they arrived, the man confessed everything, was arrested and taken to trial, where he was sentenced to decades in prison. Decades he never served because he ended up leaving on his own. For me, justice wasn't enough. Nothing would be, but at least he had closure and I hadn't made it. However, something changed after that, the nightmares. They stopped, and I no longer felt that cold, sad presence that had accompanied me for months. Valeria had finally found peace, but I was still here with the memory of what I had lost, and even though I knew I would never get it back, at least I could rest knowing that her killer paid for everything he did. Time passed, but the pain didn't. Even though Valeria's killer was behind bars and then gone, and even though her spirit no longer appeared in the alley or my dreams, something in me was still broken. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. I saw her smile, her hair blowing in the wind, her voice calling, "Daddy." It was as if a part of her had stayed with me, trapped in this world, as if she couldn't fully rest. I couldn't let her go, at least not yet. After a while, I became something I never imagined I would be, an activist. I began speaking in schools, in communities, on social media, warning young people about the dangers of bullying and digital exposure. I told them Valeria's story not as a victim but as a person, full of dreams and hope. I showed them screenshots she had saved. The messages I had received told them that this had happened to my daughter and I didn't want it to happen to you. The conversations were extremely difficult. Sometimes I saw parents crying and young people looking at their phones in fear, but I knew all of this was necessary. Valeria's loss hadn't been in vain. Her story is saving lives, and that gives me some comfort. However, there was something I didn't tell anyone, something only I knew. Sometimes, on the quietest nights, I felt Valeria was there in the room with me. I didn't see her, I didn't hear her, but I felt her presence. It was like a voice in the air, a breeze that ran across my skin. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then strange things started to happen. One night, while I was preparing a presentation, the computer turned on by itself. A photo of Valeria appeared on the screen that I didn't remember seeing before. She was smiling in that dress. White, which she loved so much. Dreams also appeared. She didn't dream them that often, but in them Valeria wasn't sad or distressed. She was at peace, walking through a field full of flowers. I think she was asking me to finally let her go, and that was the hardest part. She was all I had left of a life I'd had with someone very special, but I knew I had to do it because I couldn't keep clinging to her memory as if it would keep her alive. One afternoon, I went to the cemetery and sat on her grave. I talked to her. I told her everything I had done, all the lives her story had touched. I told her I missed her and would always miss her, but that I understood it was time to let her rest. At that moment, I felt a warmth in the air, as if the sun had suddenly risen. I knew she was there, listening to me and understanding us. They stopped. I no longer felt her presence in the house or in the cemetery or in my dreams, but her memory remains more vivid than ever because love doesn't end with death, it only changes form, and Valeria, my daughter, my light, will always be with me.